Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our third Social Justice Initiative Lunch and Learn series at Hinckley Allen, where we are really honored to have my friend and the Chief of Economic Opportunity Inclusion for the City of Boston, Segun Idowu, who you're going to find out is a pretty impressive guy and an interesting person to talk with. So we're lucky to have him here, and I want to thank you, Segun, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come hang out with us today.
Anytime.
I'm going to just remind people, similar to, for those of you who've been to past events, that you will be able to submit questions, I think through whatever the question button is on the Zoom stuff. Lee Hudson is going to be collecting them, and toward the end of the hour, she'll bring them in, and I'll ask some of the questions that you have for the chief. But again, thank you for being here. It's been great getting to know you personally over the last few years and seeing your rise as one of the leaders of driving racial equity and inclusion in the city and beyond. And we have a lot to talk about, and I know everybody here is going to benefit from your perspective and insights. So really looking forward to the conversation. But I want to start with you. So we had lunch recently, and you shared with me, you talked a bit about someone in your life who was particularly influential to you, your grandfather. And I was moved by what you said. And I was hoping you could just tell everyone a little bit about him and what he meant to you and how he influenced you and maybe helped influence the path you've taken in your career.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me. Long trip over here.
Yeah.
Bad traffic. But you know, those 30 seconds from City Hall over at 28th State were gave me moments to reflect. So well, thank you for
yeah, absolutely. That's why the time you need.
That's
and
right.
we intentionally convenient located ourselves to make this easy for you. So.
And can't confirm or deny that that's why I said yes. But so I mean, you know, I am where I talk about my grandfather, and it's part of the realization that, you know, every day for me that like I am where I am, not because of me, but because of other people. And one of those individuals who had a huge impact on my life was my grandfather. I mean, I think everyone has someone in their life that they look to as the godlike figure, for better or for worse. The person could have made your life really great, or, you know, or otherwise. And for me, I was lucky enough that the God figure that was my grandfather had a really positive impact. Kind of because he was also a pastor, so I guess there was some correlation there. But so my grandfather, Earl Lawson, pastor in Malden for many, many decades before moving to Hartford. You know, when I first met him in 1988 as a baby, he was already.
You were a baby in 88?
I was a baby in 88. I was just born. I know. Yeah.
A mere youth.
But you know, he had already done so much, and one of the things that really had an impact on my life, you know, thinking about his story, you know, he's born in 1919, and in a few, you know, by his teen years, he was already licensed as a minister, was leading a church in Tennessee before 20, and at the same time enrolled as a student in a little-known college at that time. Called Morehouse College in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And that was in 1922, because by 1926 he graduated. Excuse me, not the 20s, the 40s, 1941, and then by 45 he graduated. But it was during that time frame that he met a young man named Michael at the time, and they grew to become really good friends. And then several years after that, Michael's name was changed by their father to Martin Luther, because Martin King Sr. had a fascination with the Protestant movement, and in particular the Martin Luther figure, and changed their name. And so, you know, and I'm gonna say here, I have proof. You know, you meet a lot of folks today, and they all march with Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
But you know, I've got records. But you know, but the point is that, and I take the time to say a little bit about that because the household I grew up in was meeting the figures that we read about in history books, whether it was the Al Sampsons or the Jesse Jacksons, Al Sharptons, et cetera. And towards the end of his life, my grandfather was communicating by letters with them, where they were visiting him in Hartford, and that's what I grew up in, and also learning the stories of the Civil Rights Revolution that are not told about in history books, or really in a lot of public discussion, a lot of conversations about particularly the 60s is, you know, Rosa sat, Martin marched, Black people marched around the country for, you know, 7 times, and the walls of racism came tumbling down.
Yeah.
And
It's not that simple.
Not that simple.
Yeah, shocking.
And so I learned a lot about strategy. But anyway, you know, long way of kind of explaining, you know, that my grandfather, a lot of the stuff I've done in just a few short years are all rooted in lessons from stories that he would tell, admonishments sometimes from him. But it boils down to one piece of advice that he gave me literally a few weeks before he died, my last trip to see him, my last year so I wound up going to Morehouse as well. And so I drove down to visit him in Hartford before heading off to Atlanta for my last semester. And whatever we were doing, there's something on TV, but I remember him saying to me not to confuse motion with progress. And those are words that didn't really think about them or kind of understand it at that time, but certainly the period of the last 10 or so years now, I've always reflected on that. And so
don't confuse
motion with progress. And so everything we'll talk about today are all going to kind of boil from what he told me then.
Sounds like a pretty incredible guy and a person of history himself. And obviously quite an inspiration for you. But it also says something about you, that you took that inspiration and decided to build off of it and continue down that direction. Not everybody would. You were also born and raised in Boston. You're very proud of that. You talked about that a lot when we were at lunch. So tell us a little bit about your background in Boston and how being from Boston has influenced you and influenced your decision to stay here and continue to work on furthering racial equity and inclusion here in your city.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I was in school in Atlanta, a lot of people were confused when I moved back to Boston. I mean, and I certainly had my share of arguments with people about, you know, oh, Boston is this and that. Well, now that I'm in a political role, I never know if I can make certain jokes anymore. So I guess I'll keep that one to myself. You'll all just have to wait until I'm not in this role. You know, I always defended Boston. You know, the Boston.
And it needed to be defended in some people, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, even back then, 2008 to 12, you know, the Boston today is not what it was then, but also the Boston of 2008 is not the Boston of what it was in 1978. And so, you know, I think even the story there is how Boston is always moving forward. And there might be days or weeks and sometimes months where it feels like there's a gut punch and that you've moved back several pieces, but that has never stopped Boston's forward movement. And I think that from all the way back in the revolutionary days to where we are today has been the story of Boston. And so, you know, I've always been proud of the history here in Boston, particularly as a Black person in this country, to think about how many of the figures that you study in history, if they either have their roots here in the city or at some way along their journey had to stop by to pick up certain learnings or philosophies or partners or, you know, et cetera. And I mean, today we talk about Martin King and Coretta, you know, we talk about Malcolm Little, now known, you know, Malcolm X, you know, going back to Fred Douglass, Sojourner Truth. There are so many popular names that we know that came through here, but then even thinking about, you know, thinking about Beacon Hill, for instance, that we're right near, and how many of the first Black businesses were started here in Boston. Not just the first Black businesses, but first Black franchises started here on Beacon Hill.
What are some examples?
Well, there's one example. I'm blanking on her name now, but there was a woman who owned a hair salon on Beacon Hill, but had 2 other stores here in Boston, and then several more across the Commonwealth. And I mean, kind of unheard of that people own even more than 1 store. But that was, an incredible thing for that time, and something we're trying to build back up towards today. And so Boston has a really incredible history. I was always proud to come from here to learn it, to be a part of it. So much has happened even in the time of my growing up. And I'm sure many of the times of the folks joining us today. So, Boston's great. However, there's one thing I've always understood, that Boston at the same time has been a place that has always loved to talk about, progressive, things, always more difficult to implement.
Yeah.
And we are very much about taking the small wins and kind of the superficial things as well, very surface level as opposed to substantive.
Yeah.
And so, we're a city that will celebrate, Ayanna Pressley, first Black woman on the Boston City Council, first Black woman in Congress to represent Massachusetts after several hundred years. It doesn't matter if there's a first, if there's not a second.
Yeah.
And if you think about a lot of positions, since, Boston's economy runs on politics, not always a second or a third. And so, and that's just the focus on the individual. We kind of broaden it to the whole community. Lots of work that we got to do to
Similar
make it
story.
better. Yeah.
More of the motion versus progress.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're definitely trying to make progress. There's no question about it. And I have to ask, and just for the benefit of everyone else, I don't know that there's an award or recognition you haven't received yet. And I'm just going to read some of the list for people's benefit. So year after year, Boston Magazine keeps naming you one of the 100 most influential people in the city of Boston.
It's not true at home.
Yeah, I would bet. That's a place to be humbled,
That's
right?
That's right.
In July 2020, there was a really great, huge piece about you on the front page of the Sunday Boston Globe, where they declared you a man of the moment for your work supporting Black businesses impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. But being the man of the moment wasn't enough. So later in 2020, the Globe selected you to be a Bostonian of the Year. In 2021, Lawyers for Civil Rights recognized you as their Keeper of the Flame, and Eastern Bank recognized you as their 2021 COVID Warrior. It's incredible. And you definitely make me feel like a slacker. But in all seriousness,
Says the president of,
wow.
incoming president of Curry
Yeah,
College.
well, okay. But in all seriousness, you have in your, since 1988 short life, had a real meaningful impact already and are seen as a leader in driving racial equity and inclusion. And all these recognitions are very well earned. Knowing you a bit, I know that this for you isn't about trying to collect personal accolades and awards, and that you really believe deeply in the importance of the work you're doing. And I wanted to ask if you would just share one example of a story or a person, a situation that you personally, based on the work you've done, where you've had a really positive impact on furthering racial equity and inclusion, helping somebody overcome a barrier that is an inspiration for you and that you're proud of, and that is something you look back on to continue to motivate and fuel you going forward.
Well, I'm gonna give 2, but I'm gonna be short. I'm gonna be brief.
Okay. Even better.
Because I think it was just the different stages of life for me. I mean, it's first kind of foray into doing anything in my mind, meaningful was the body cam movement. After Mike Brown is murdered by Darren Wilson, we decide here in Boston, me and Shakia Scott, to find ways to prevent a Michael Brown from being shot and killed on Warren Street, or Tamir Rice from being gunned down in Jeep Jones Park, or Sandra Bland going missing on Seaver Street. And so,
Sean, sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
where were you working at this time?
so for body cameras, I was working at the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the U.S. Senate, and I got to say, and that was a phenomenal experience. And they really stuck to their mission and their principles, because any other job I think if I had would have fired me. Because first of all, I was arrested at one of the protests, and also body cameras. Today you talk about body cameras and really anything around policing. There's more of a sympathetic ear to those conversations, and of course, there's still the threat of Blue Lives Matter, and but at the end of the day, there's more conversation.
Yeah.
Whereas back in 2014, if you said anything about reform to police, you were anti-police. There were concerns around, especially on the protester side, around threats from police, about monitoring and tracking and surveillance that we were seeing come out in the press, whether it was FBI or here in Boston with the brick. And so it took a lot of courage, I would say, for a lot of the folks who did way more than what Shakia and I did. But so we started the body camera movement because we decided that Ferguson didn't need us. They had all the resources of people and bodies they needed. But what we wanted to do was not wait until something bad happened in Boston to then make something happen. And also at the time, we are heralding our police as the greatest force in the country, or community policing force in the country.
Crime rates were relatively low.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're the most progressive city in the union, allegedly. And so we were like, if we push for this thing, which is what we believed was a very simple reform and protects people on both sides, and ensures as a third party voice, because in the case of Darren Wilson and Michael Brown, there was only one witness because the other one was dead. So we did something. We thought we, in 2 weeks, be over. Quick win for everyone, right? And it took 3 years. So I bring up that particular example, though, to say the number of messages I get of officers and civilians who remember me from, kind of being a part of this group that led this movement in Boston, which was different than any other in the country, because we wrote the policy. And so roughly 60-70% of the policy that BPD has right now comes from what we deliberated, what we wrote in talking with community. But it has changed, it has set lives on a different path because there was another observer. And so things could have gone a different way. So that was one example. But one other concrete one on the economic side comes from my time here now, but kind of bleeds into the BECMA time. So before I came into this role from BECMA, we were focused on ownership acquisition. Because if we're going to talk about wealth, one of the things that we talk about in this state is housing and home ownership, which is great. That's one way, but not the only way. And what we know is that a lot of our businesses, many of which are small or medium sized, operational support, rent, et cetera, though that burden is just as high as it is on the housing side. And so at BECMA, we were saying, or we're believing that we need to help people own the land that they're on and acquire the property they're a part of for stability. Then I got named into this role. So the first thing I did when I got into this role was I had a bunch of ARPA money,
federal money.
Right.
Yeah.
And a reasonable amount for one cabinet.
Yeah.
Which I'll say now because it's all gone. But
You managed to spend it.
Yes. But at that time, I was like, please give me more.
Yeah.
And I'll just use one example. There was a business I was working with before I left BECMA called Intriguing Hair. Intriguing Hair, a young woman who started this business where she makes wigs for women and men. And, yes, for stylistic purposes, but really those who are facing health challenges. And so many who have dealt with cancer or other health issues where their hair falls out, these wigs help them reclaim what makes them feel better. And this business was part of 5 businesses on the ground floor of a historic building called the Vertula Building in Hyde Park. So the owner of the building, the organizational owner at that time, needed to offload that property because of COVID, and so they needed to, work on their finances. And they didn't tell the business owners. They didn't give them first right of refusal. And so people started looking around, and I got an urgent phone call from Nakia, who's the owner of Intriguing Hair, saying, there are random people coming into my shop looking around specs and, looking around and what it could be worth. And we're all scared we're going to, someone's going to buy the building and then we're going to get kicked out, which is where it was going to go. So she started putting together, working with the business owners, putting together different, types of capital. And when I came over to this role, I worked with housing with Sheila Dillon, and we put together a package where we gave $1 million grant money.
No strings.
No strings. And we worked with mass development. And I got it, Dan Rivera, former Lawrence mayor, has been incredible. They put in, and we worked with some other partners. But at the end of the day, we helped these businesses buy the building. And now these 5 business owners have no fear of being kicked out, and there's units of affordable housing that are now being renovated to modern standards that families either won't get kicked out of because they're there, or the available units will be able to house more people who are looking for affordable units. So like that is awesome. To see the power of government, was great.
With the right people in government, seeing those opportunities and prioritizing them. Yeah, you have to feel great about that. You mentioned BECMA. For those who don't know BECMA is the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. And a lot of the accolades that I mentioned were during the time that you were the president CEO. Is that the title? So maybe tell us a little bit more about what BECMA is, some of the initiatives while you were there, and why BECMA is important.
Well, first of all, kudos to you for getting the name right. When is that?
What do other people?
I really don't even want to embarrass. Okay, and if I say it, then everyone else is going to remember it that way, and then it will never. But so BECMA. So I always let folks know I did not found BECMA, and I say that because most people, because they only became familiar with BECMA because of the work we were doing, they assumed that I founded it. But
you did take it to another level in a big way.
I work with a lot of people.
Yeah, okay.
So BECMA was founded in 2015 after the Federal Reserve study came out called Reserve Wealth. And of course, everyone freaked out over that one statistic, that $8, but really the report itself. That
just for everyone's benefit, maybe mention the statistic.
Oh, sure. So if you've not read this report or seen this figure, although I gotta say, I don't know how, but the report studied wealth in the greater Boston area, and was part of kind of a national focus on different communities. And one of the things the researchers at the time found was that the median net worth of white families in the greater Boston area was $247,500. And the median net worth of African-American Black families was $8. And, take it a step further too, for Dominican families, $0. And so at the end of the day, huge disparity right now. We all know disparities exist in this city and across the country, but to see it put that starkly, quite frankly, scared everybody, because so many people had been doing work since the 60s to put us on a different course. And so it really alarmed, especially a lot of Black leaders who, felt as if their work was not leading to the results that we wanted. So long story short, there was a huge mass meeting. About 800 people came out at Prince Hall in Dorchester to talk about this report. And there was no yelling and screaming. It was all about, we got to come up with a plan about how we address this. One of the things that came out of it was that a couple of the Black business leaders came together and said, we need an organization that's going to represent the interests of Black businesses, because there is not one that exists. NAACP has 12 committees. They focus on everything related to Black life. Urban League is focused mostly on workforce. And other Black organizations were not big enough. So they started this group called BECMA to do just that, to advocate for Black businesses. When I came in 2018, the only charge the board gave me was raise our profile. And, so that was that's
Man of the moment.
Right? that's what I focused on.
You did that,
right?
Yes.
But end of the day, the organization is focused on representing the 2,000 Black employer firms that are employing 17,000 residents and generating $2 billion a year. I still remember the spiel. And that's just employer-owned firms. There are about 40 or 50,000, probably more than that, Black, small, mostly sole proprietor businesses in the state. And so all that said, the organization is focused on policies, practices, et cetera, that are going to help scale Black businesses. And, our big thing was contracts when I was there. And that's still a focus. But the new president, Nicole Obi, who's been fantastic, she was the VP of operations during my tenure there, has really worked to stabilize the organization. It's kind of funny. When I left, so the reason why people think I founded it was because I was the only employee for the first 2 years that I was there. And then the third year, we had some dollars to hire people. So by the time I left, there were probably 6 full-time people there. Nicole came on, and I think now there are maybe 21 or something like that. So clearly, she knows what she's doing. It took me time to get my sea legs, but she took that thing around.
You got it headed the right direction. Well, thank you for describing that. And it's interesting. I was thinking about the fact that at BECMA, one of the things I know you really focused on was, as you mentioned, contracting and increasing the extent to which governments in particular were spending government money contracting with vendors and other construction firms and others who are owned by people of color as another way to grow wealth among people of color. And you were advocating for Boston to do more. You were even involved with other advocacy organizations in suing the city of Boston. And now the table's turned. You're on the other side of it. And you're the person at the city of Boston, probably more than any other, who's responsible for making sure the city of Boston is doing this. And so it's obviously really, and as somebody who's had the privilege of working in government, it's an enormous opportunity. You mentioned one example before of the ways and the power of government to make a difference in people's lives. Before talking about any specific stuff you're doing on contracting or anything else at the city, you just talk about how that change in which side of the table you were on is going for you, and how you're liking being on the government side and being in a position to drive and implement public policy on areas like racial equity and inclusion, and what you're liking about it and what is challenging about it or surprising about it.
Well, there's positives and opportunities on both sides. So I'll say this. BECMA was focused on contracting because one thing we understood is that Black businesses hire other Black businesses and they hire Black people. So to exactly what you said, you award a big contract to a Black business, the Black community is going to benefit at the end of the day, which everyone should be concerned about because, as Black communities get better, every community gets better, and history has borne that out. It's never worked in the reverse. So that's one reason we focused on it. And actually, to your point about the suing, it made for a very awkward first meeting when I came into this role. So for those who don't know, there was in February 2020, the city released something called, or conducted, I should say, a disparity study. The disparity study allows you to measure how many of your contracts are going to certified diverse companies. And the city's report showed that over a 5-year period between 2017 to 22, 2015 to 20, that out of 47,000 contracts worth $2 billion, only 0.4% of them were awarded to Black businesses, which was roughly 14 million in real dollars, and 0.8% for Latinx-owned businesses at 18 million. And so we were like, well, that's clearly on purpose. Because even by accident, you get to whole numbers, you know? And so, so we teamed up with Amplify, Lawyers for Civil Rights, and the Greater Boston Latino Network to file a civil rights complaint against the city in February of, what year is this? So 21. And then in November of 21, I got named as the Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion, which meant that my first external meeting was me and the Corporation Counsel for the city sitting on this side of the table, and Nicole Obie and other members of the coalition sitting on that side of the table talking about this civil rights complaint, how we were gonna solve it. So it was kind of weird. But since then, we've worked on a whole lot of stuff to first on the process pieces, on the policy pieces, to then make sure that we are connecting our businesses. And I think, based on a lot of the companies that have been awarded contracts in just the last 18 months that we've been there, for me, it's more so to prove what kind of the negative of what people have said up until now, which is that we can't find diverse businesses, or that diverse businesses don't have the capacity. Well, City Fresh Foods, which is a Black-founded, Roxbury-based, employee-owned company, is now feeding all 50,000 public school students. And there's many examples we can give, but it's been great to be able to be in a position to prove it, and that's been the great positive of being in the role.
Yeah.
What I miss is just being able to say whatever I want. So,
you have to be a little more measured.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, it's great that you're there doing the good stuff. So tell us a little bit more about that. You mentioned some of the progress you're making in contracting with minority-owned businesses. What are some of the other 2 or 3 of the other big initiatives you're working on to further equity inclusion in Boston?
I'm glad you said 2 or 3, because on my board I've got like 16 major projects that we're working on. But to level set, I'll just let folks know. So I've got 5 departments under me. So I've got the Office of Tourism, Sports and Entertainment, which is all special events and conventions and things like that. I've got the Office of Consumer Affairs and Licensing, which is liquor, cannabis, and entertainment licenses. I've got the Office of Supply Diversity, which is contracts. I've got the Office of Small Business, which deals with all 40,000 small businesses in the city. And then I've got the actual Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion, which includes our cannabis equity work, business strategy work, which they do things like how the work they did with the state to get Lego here. And what's the other group under there that I'm like? Oh, global affairs. So how we engage with international partners and things like that. So
it's a lot.
2 or 3 things.
2 or 3.
Well, of course, the biggest thing, here we are sitting at 28 State, and so, the downtown revitalization plan sits squarely under our cabinet's work. And there is a lot we're doing to work with the bid, a lot we're doing to work with other stakeholders in the downtown area to bring people to the area and kind of expand our focus beyond the workforce, because, as we're seeing here, people are able to join virtually. So I assume that everyone is here every day of the week. And so we are not just focused on the downtown workforce or relying on that to bring foot traffic, but it's all the events and initiatives we're doing to kind of create FOMO and show that when you're not in the office is what you're missing out on. But also, here's why: if you live in Charlestown, you should make the trip, or in West Roxbury, you should come downtown, or tourists. So that's one big.
For people who aren't as young as you and me, FOMO is fear of missing out.
Sorry. Yes, sorry about that.
We're hip. We understand this.
Well, speaking of all that, nightlife.
Yeah.
is another big initiative. We just, launched or hired, I should say, our director of nightlife economy, Corinne Reynolds, and her job is to think about all the aspects of nightlife, not just clubbing and drinking and all that, but really kind of how we create this thriving economy for all things to do. If, for instance, our downtown seaport, areas are 24-hour, and thinking of the audience for that. So a lot of times when we talk about late night, I mean, you saw articles like this in the BBJ and others where the real focus for the journalists was on people, college age to young professionals. And it's like, sure, yes, we want young families and young people to enjoy their time at the city. But if you're not 21 years old, aren't many options. And so what can we highlight? What can we build up that makes you excited to go out of your home and not on your computer, the whole day? But also, for 40 plus, 50 plus, again, not everything is going to a concert or a play or going out to dinner. It gets stale. Like, what are the other things that we can bring to the city, or events or programming that you can involve your family in, or that you can go out for date night? That again is not just eating and drinking. So we really are trying to think holistically about, from 0 to 100, how people can enjoy all 24 hours of the day. So those are two big ones. I mean, everything else, AI is a big thing that we're focused on with our CIO, Chief Information Officer, Santi Garces, on impact of AI, but also the opportunities in terms of the role that Boston can play. And so many more. I mean,
you have a lot to,
board.
you can read the paper any day, and it's all stuff that you have to be involved in or be worried about or care about. So Hinckley Allen, just want to check how much, all right, we have about 20 minutes left.
Oh, wow.
So Hinckley Allen, as you know, cares about doing our part. We have a partnership with the GK Fund, who I know you're familiar with. We started about a year ago. Corporate and other lawyers in the firm started providing pro bono services to the GK Fund grantees, the small businesses owned by people of color that the GK Fund supports. And we had an event recently to celebrate a lot of the grantees and to award some new grants that I know you were planning to walk 30 seconds across the street to, and then the mayor wanted you to go some event with her. So I still don't understand why you prioritized that, but whatever. Anyway, we are trying to do our part. We also know there's a lot more we can and should be doing. And I'm sure you get this question a lot, but what else can or should Hinckley Allen and other law firms and businesses in the greater Boston area, what should we be doing to help drive racial equity and inclusion and to be part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem?
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate the question. And one of the things that's made me optimistic about the future is that here we are 3 years after George Floyd, and the question is still being asked. And I think that's a good thing, because a lot of times after major incidents in the country that stimulate any conversation usually dies down in the year. And so I appreciate the fact that Hinckley Allen is obviously committed to being supportive and moving the needle here. So first, I would just say, I think the work that you're doing with GK Fund is amazing. I think that should continue. I think GK Fund is really addressing one of the core issues that you'll hear really from any small business, but in particular those owned by people of color, which is the access to capital, the access to technical assistance. Those are the two biggest things. And so anything that Hinckley, and not just you all as a firm, but even individuals that make up the firm, in helping to grow the GK Fund so that either more businesses are impacted or you can impact fewer with a whole lot more to help scale them, I think would be amazing. And that's really what's needed now is, again, the work at BACMA was to show, that there are firms that have the capacity. However, the capacity of many of Black and brown-owned businesses, as good as it might be, is not at the level of most others, or at least white-owned companies. And so we want to grow them even more. And so I would say that. I would say it's partnering up with other existing programs. I think of the Foundation for Business Equity, which is helping to scale those businesses. And then I would love to make sure, I know you asked me what Hinckley Allen can do, but I'm thinking more so what we could be doing and how we can be leaning in more based on the desire of the firm to lean in and be more supportive. So, after this, it's calling Alicia up or saying to our director of small business and saying, I need you to chat with Jay Gonzalez about how we can, make sure the 40,000 businesses we're working with know of the resource, or that our supplier diversity team, led by Andre Lima, is talking with you and your colleagues about how all the diverse businesses that we've got certified could potentially get some support.
Yeah. It's reminding me, and we have had conversations about this since my lunch with you. You mentioned as one example of what you're seeing that you're increasing the extent to which the city's trying to contract with businesses owned by people of color. And you mentioned that one barrier running into in the construction space in particular is that a lot of the small minority-owned construction companies are having a challenge getting the bonding that they need to meet the city's requirements and be able to participate in some of the contracts. And so, there's an element of that maybe Hinckley Allen can't help with, but we have a bunch of construction lawyers here who are experts in this industry. And one of the things the firm's really well known for. So one of the things we bounced around is whether we might be able to host a clinic, like a one stop where the city knows of businesses that are interested in exploring contracts with the city, and they maybe have, whether it's that issue or others, they can come and talk to lawyers who are experts in that area who might be able to provide advice.
So so there's two things here. One is so I want to make the connection to Andre because we haven't announced it publicly yet, but we're going to be launching something called the Scale Initiative, which is, I've got $9 million from ARPA and this is not the ARPA I had when I started in the role, but I got more.
Yeah, well done.
But $9 million to launch an initiative to scale diverse companies across 6 categories. And they're all 6 that the city is either already spending a lot of money in or will spend money in. So it's like construction, design, food. I can't remember the other 2, but then the other is it's number 6, but it's also a thread through all of them, which is clean energy, waste management, things like that. So, and we're going to be leaning in real heavy on the clean energy piece. And so we want all of the companies across these spaces to have some element of being in the green economy. But I say all that to say that, maybe Hinckley for all of these companies, because it would only, 9 million spread across, a bunch of companies, because we want to give, 1, 2, 300,000, whatever the need is. So you're really only talking about 30 or less companies. But if Hinckley is able to kind of serve, at least for the construction companies, in that way, I think that'd be great. Because the other thing I'm thinking about is helping companies understand what a real good joint venture partnership looks like. Because a lot of them get into joint ventures, or some of them get into these JVs, and not really. I mean, on paper, it helps the GC. It helps. I won't call anyone out because I'm not saying they're not bad actors here, but they're who I can think of. But it helps them win the bid because they have a diverse partner, but doesn't always equal it benefiting the diverse partnership. Exactly, and so. Those are the types of things that would be helpful as well, because when it comes to our construction projects, we are really, especially at the BPDA, very much leaning heavily on both public and private projects that we want to see the diversity. And so we know that companies are going to explore the JV area. And so I want to make sure that folks are prepared when these larger companies reach out and say, hey, you should be a partner on this, that they're not going to get screwed.
Yeah.
You know, so I think all that
All
would
right.
be great.
So
Yeah.
plenty to explore
Yes.
about ways in which Hinckley Allen might be a partner. I see that we have a question from somebody who's participating from near or far. Looks like a series of questions. How do we focus on the seconds and the thirds? Which I assume is a reference to what you were talking about before. I've attended a few workshops, conversations with and while we praise the small wins and wanting to be a part of inclusion, how do we hold the people who can push change accountable? It's no longer good enough to hire Black and brown for numbers.
Right.
What about the professional development, so their possibility for career growth? To me, this is the real change. Black and brown communities have so many struggles, lacking financial education, money management, assist in additional poor decisions. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I would say there's a couple of things here. I don't know what I said around the seconds and thirds. However, I'm gonna pick up a couple of threads here. One is around we can't just keep hiring Black and brown and thinking that that's enough, which I completely agree with, because one of the things that you talk to the DEI chiefs in companies who, you know, especially after George Floyd, a bunch of articles have come out in the last roughly 6 or 7 months talking about how all the chief diversity officers have all flamed out from their jobs because they get hired as the new blackface as part of the C-suite, you know, Black and brown, and they burn out in a year because they're not giving the staff, they're not given the access, and you see many companies right now kind of reversing course because of the national conversation and pushback on whether or not diversity should be prioritized. You see what some states like Florida and Texas are doing. Yeah. And so I completely agree. And coupled with that, making sure that that folks are getting the necessary skills training in these roles. Because a lot of times people are just getting hired in order to either combat a negative perception out there, usually on social media, or to be proactive before, because, you know, you see, especially on the national side of things, you know, you see one major company go down or, you know, get attacked, and then everyone else starts hiring and saying, oh, look, you know, so don't come for us.
Yeah.
And there's
check the box as opposed to motion, not progress.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, I would say too that, I mean, this is not the conversation for here, but like you know, my community is always having internal conversations too about like what we accept as progress, because, and I'll just speak for Boston itself. Like I said, now I'm reminded, we, especially for Boston, I can only talk about Boston. How do we focus on the seconds and the thirds? I think even asking the question is moving us towards how we focus on it, because very often, I mean, Boston's a place that likes to be the first. Massachusetts too is this exceptionalism. And, you know, we want to be the ones that can, you know, it's kind of like I don't remember who talked about it. Someone, I don't know if it was Governor Healy or someone just talked about how, you know, we let that mess us up a little, that we focus too much on wanting to be the first or whatever. And then after that, we completely ignore it and don't care anymore. And that's where we get $8 from. Yeah. So I would just say, you know, how we continue to focus on it is exactly that. You not letting your foot off the gas pedal and then making sure everyone else around you is not focused. You know, it doesn't, you know, they're not like the dog from the movie Up, where it's like squirrel, you know, just, you know, go move on, you know, look at something else. However, there is one thing though in the question. Yes, Black and brown communities are, there are particular struggles that are in Black and brown communities. However, one of the things that I really tried to start moving back more towards in terms of shaping or impacting the narrative is coming from an asset-based mindset rather than a deficit-based mindset. Because my concern has been, and one of the reasons I think that we often don't advance, is that we very often, if ever, recognize the progress that's being made. We very rarely talk about it. It's always about what isn't true or what doesn't exist. Or, I remember reading somewhere, a statistic. It was like, 20% of the Black community, blah, blah, blah. But that meant that 80% of the community, right, had the thing that the article was talking about. And I was like, yes, we need to do more to make sure that the 20% now make it 100, but to completely ignore that the community had overcome a particular obstacle and was thriving in this one area, I think is what lends to a lot of people feeling like nothing will ever change, unless the apathy.
Yeah.
And why so many, just believe nothing good will ever happen or that things will never change. When in reality, especially for Black people in Boston, there has never been a time in the city's history that Black people can make the claims that we can make today. I mean, individually, you look at who is in positions of power, and I'm talking about real power.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about, you just look at the mayor's cabinet. That's why, yes, my check is signed by Mayor Wu, but I can also say that Mayor Wu is probably one of the most transformative mayors we've ever had for Black and brown communities at this particular time, because you look at the cabinet, look at the people who are running the most important pieces of city life. Look at who's running the BPDA, Arthur Jemison. That's all of development in the city, economic development. Look at who's running communications for the city, Jessica Pierre. Look at who's running health care for the city, Basola Ojukutu. You look at, they're all gonna get mad at me because I'm blanking now, but there are like so many folks who are in really important positions. That said, Mariama, White Hammond, energy and environment. But the reason why it's also important that these folks are in these roles, all of us knew each other before we got here. So I don't know if the mayor is like this incredible genius that, where she like knew all these things, or if this was happenstance. I want to give her the credit for being this genius, of course, but like the fact that all of us.
This is being recorded, so I think it's important.
Yes, well, just make sure you clip that part and send it straight to her when we start having employee reviews. But the fact that all of us know each other knew each other before we came here means that, the mayor's also committed to breaking down silos. And so, it's natural. All of us were already going out to dinner or hanging out or whatever, have these relationships. And, my team and energy and environment are already working together on stuff that in another age wouldn't have, because everyone was very focused on their own lane. So the reason why that's important is we're able to connect with folks in the community who at one time never had a voice or a line into City Hall. And so, but that's just politics. Look at the foundations, the Boston Foundation, the Himes Foundation, the Segun Foundation. Then you look at the C-suite and companies, you look at Corey Thomas, CEO of Rapid7, one of the largest firms, tech firms out there. Then you have, in security, then you have, in the development community, so many more coming to the table beyond the 2 or 3 that, we've always had. You see across industry, just what the C-suite looks at, either as VPs or COO. It is incredible. It has never existed like that for Black folks in the city. However, we cannot rest on that. And so to this person's point, yes, we have a lot of struggles. Many are not, though, different from white communities, because in Boston, I would submit that the biggest challenge is yes, racial, but also economic. The divide between the haves and have-nots is clear across every racial category in the city. And that's a thing that 18% poverty in the city, that we got, and you look at the racial, of course, yes, disparities. However, it's a big number and something that we really have to, so anyway, but I would say though, because there was a big thing about financial education. I forget the term that folks use, financial literacy. And when we're at Beckma, and I'm sort of still in this camp now, is, sure, but Black people need money. At the end of the day, when you look at, how folks of color are in dead-end jobs, they're not careers or on a career path, they're in low-wage jobs, aren't able to support their families. No amount of financial literacy will get you to a place where you can take care of self, home, family, right? If you don't also have the income that will support it. And so while I agree that there are some issues at the end of the day, and this is why the reparations conversation is important, what matters is the fact that people just don't have the resources.
Yeah.
And I would say the fact that Black folks have made it this far, given the fact that in 1865, Black people had literally nothing in this country and are still around and are still able to support. That's why I focus on the asset. We actually know a lot about what to do. It's just people don't trust us. They don't give us the money. Anyway, that was a long-winded way, but thank you for that question. I appreciate it.
And you've got a very optimistic perspective is what I take from you, that focusing people on all the progress that's been made, coming back to your grandfather, there's more progress to be made, but you personally are doing a ton and making a difference. And I know you and the city of Boston can't do it alone and need lots of partners. I hope this conversation and people getting to hear from you directly about the progress that's been made and more to do in your own personal story is inspirational, as it is for me. And I just want to close this out by thanking you again for spending some of your time with us and for everything you're doing to help make the world a better place in that way. And I think the city's lucky to have you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining and for spending the time. And personally, as many of you probably know, this is my last Lunch and Learn series. I'm going to have the privilege of hosting with really interesting people. And want to thank Hinckley Allen for putting this on. And I'm going to promise that I'm going to be a viewer and participant if I'm invited in the future. All right, thanks everybody.